Hello everyone, and welcome back to AP Bio with AP Playground. Today we're covering topic 3.3, cellular energy. We're focusing on the role of energy in living organisms, specifically on the fact that all living systems require an input of energy. We'll be looking at the laws of thermodynamics and at ATP, and the suggested skill is argumentation. 6C, provide reasoning to justify a claim by connecting evidence to biological theories. First up, we need to discuss some vocabulary. Metabolism is the totality of an organism's chemical reactions, both those that release energy and that store energy. And energy is just the ability to do work. Once an organism runs out of energy, it dies. And so life requires constant inputs of energy to survive, and energy is transferred through catabolic and anabolic pathways that break apart reactants to release energy, and pathways that use up energy and store it and make a product. And to understand these energy transfers, you have to know what's called thermodynamics. And there are two laws that we need to take a look at today. First law is that energy cannot be created or destroyed. When energy is being quote-unquote used up for a certain process, that does not mean it is gone. That just means that it has been transferred to a different state. It has been released as chemical waste or as heat energy, but it cannot be created or destroyed. So when energy passes through your body, for instance, when you eat food and then the energy from that food is used up to do a process, that does not mean that the energy has been destroyed. It has just been changed and transferred throughout your body. And the second law is that every reaction reduces the amount of available usable energy, because within every reaction, some energy is going to be lost as heat. And the second law can also be called the law of entropy, saying that energy is always going to diffuse and create quote-unquote disorder. Essentially, it will move from a place of high energy to low energy, because moving from low to high is going to require additional input of energy. Now, let's talk about free energy and types of reactions. Free energy is the part of a system's energy that is able to perform work, meaning this is the energy that can cause a reaction or the energy that can do things. And changes in free energy are notated with delta G, delta meaning change and G standing for Gibbs, because it's called Gibbs free energy. And there are two reactions that we can take a look at here. First of all is an endergonic reaction, where energy is going to be stored through the formation of a bond. This consumes free energy, so the change in free energy is going to be positive. The reactants by themselves, plus the input of energy, is going to create a product with more energy than the initial reactants. If we're taking a look at photosynthesis, for instance, which is conversion of light energy into chemical energy, then the reactants by themselves, plus the input of energy from the sun, is going to create glucose, which has more energy than combined than the initial reactants. When the reaction took place, some sun energy was lost and some was stored as chemical energy in glucose. And you end with more energy than you started. This means a positive change in free energy. The product is going to have more energy than the reactants. And this is seen here in this endothermic or endogonic reaction, where you have the activation energy required to start this process, and here's the energy of the reactants, and you see there is going to be more energy in the products than there was in the reactants. There is a positive change in free energy. Meanwhile, exergonic reactions are those where energy is going to be released through the breaking of bonds. This is going to release free energy, so the change in free energy is going to be negative. So exergonic reactions have reactants that have energy stored in them already. We're starting from a pretty high point of energy here. And some of that energy is going to be used to break the bonds. That's going to be the activation energy. But more energy is going to be released than it took to break the bond. We see this amount of energy released. You end with less than you started because all of the energy has been released. The products don't have energy because that energy from the reactants has been released. And as such, you get a negative change in free energy. The product has less energy than in the reactants because all of it's been released. And enzymes assist in these processes by lowering the activation energy and separating anabolic and catabolic processes. Additionally, similar processes are located near each other to make it easy to create this breaking-making connection. Now it's time to take a look at the type of energy that are used by cells. So cells use ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is a nucleic acid. And by use this type of energy, I mean that energy, chemical energy, is converted into ATP, and the cell uses ATP as a sort of energy currency to perform processes. And it's a nucleic acid that consists of an adenine nitrogenous group, a ribose sugar, and 3 phosphates. And this third phosphate group is going to be especially unstable. This bond is going to be especially unstable. So work in the cell is done through hydrolysis of ATP. And if you don't remember what hydrolysis is, that means you're adding water to break a bond. And energy released in the exergonic reaction, and this is going to form ADP. So essentially, hydrolysis is going to break this very unstable bond between the third and second phosphate groups, and that's going to leave you with ADP, which is going to be a diphosphate instead of a triphosphate. It only has 2 phosphate groups. And this energy can also be used for an endergonic reaction. And this leads me to talk about energy coupling. So essentially, once ATP has been hydrolyzed and energy has been released from ATP, now that energy can be used to perform certain actions in the cell. So this is energy coupling is essentially pairing a process that releases energy and then that takes up that energy in order to create a smooth cycle and fulfill the processes that the cell needs to perform. So here we're going to take a look at a diagram of energy coupling and some examples. So energy coupling works in the sense that energy from catabolic reactions, endergonic energy releasing processes, are then used to form ATP. And then once this ATP is hydrolyzed, water is added, the energy for the cellular work is released. So ATP really does become the currency of the cell because the majority of energy that's entering into the cell is then being used to create ATP, and ATP is used by the cell for all of the cellular processes needed. And of course, once ATP has been hydrolyzed, you have the products of ADP and a phosphate group, which are then added back together from energy from these reactions here. So there are a couple of examples of energy coupling within the cell, one of them being photosynthesis and cellular respiration, which we'll be covering in the next subunits. Photosynthesis converts light energy and some inorganic materials into glucose, which is a form of chemical energy that can be consumed as food, and then cellular respiration will turn that glucose into ATP, which can then be used by the cell to perform processes. Additionally, we have the sodium-potassium pump shown up here, which requires ATP as it is a form of active transport. You can see the sodium ions enter the pump and ATP is hydrolyzed to add 1 phosphate group to the pump. This energy boost will allow the pump to switch the side on which is open, allowing the sodium ions to leave and the potassium ions to enter. And once the phosphate group has left the pump, then it will then revert back to its original shape, allowing the potassium ions to cross the membrane. So reviewing cellular energy, you got to know the laws of thermodynamics, that energy is not created or destroyed, and that every single reaction that takes place is going to reduce the amount of available usable energy because it's been lost as heat. You should also know about Gibbs free energy and endergonic versus exergonic reactions. Reactions that release energy are going to create a negative change in Gibbs free energy, while reactions that store energy are going to create a positive change in Gibbs free energy. You should also know about ATP and its role in the cell, as well as how it plays within energy coupling between different exergonic and endergonic processes. We'll see you next time in photosynthesis.